Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. Clergyman Roger Williams was a Puritan theologian and linguist who founded Providence Plantations in 1636 on land given to him by Narragansett chief Canonicus. Roger Williams was driven from Massachusetts Bay Colony and sought refuge with the Narragansett tribe, and Canonicus made him welcome, despite being wary of the colonial settlers. In 1636, he gave Williams a large tract of land on which to establish Providence Plantations, the nucleus which became the colony of Rhode Island. Williams named the settlement Providence Plantations because he believed that God had brought them there. In 1637, Canonicus was largely responsible for the Narragansett's decision to side with the colonists during the Pequot War, an armed conflict that took place in 1636 and ended in 1638 in New England between the Pequot tribe and an alliance of the colonists from the Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, and Saybrook colonies and their allies from the Narragansett and Mohegan tribes. The war concluded with the decisive defeat of the Pequot. Let's travel back with Eric Yanis of the Other States of America podcast to learn more about this remarkable time in North American history.
Roger Williams, known famously as the founder of Rhode Island. By 1640, the estimates are vague, but there may have been 100 people in Providence proper, one source estimates, while another says that there was around 40 families. Now, I believe 40 families would make more than 100 people, but either way, there was actually more people settled on Rhode Island under these newer colonies than in Providence proper. Not only did Rogers not have any jurisdiction over these other settlements, they were actually larger and more prosperous than his own older Providence plantations. In the late 1630s and early 1640s, the union of small towns on the Narragansett Bay was informally maintained and barely a union at all. I would go so far as to say it wasn't a union, but a loose confederation with some system of correspondence between the settlements. And it would become more and more apparent that this loose configuration would not maintain their independence, especially from Massachusetts. As you come into the year 1642, the king is storming Parliament with 400 soldiers. Parliament, being forewarned of this event, was able to run King Charles straight out of London, and we have a civil war on our hands. This coincides with Massachusetts creeping north up the Atlantic coast, absorbing parts of New Hampshire and eventually Maine. Well, now they would also try to expand to the south. If Massachusetts could come to bring Rhode Island and Providence to heel, the many people they banished who ended up in this area would then have to quickly vacate or sell their properties and find somewhere else to live. And the idea of Providence as a safe haven for people who are seeking liberty of conscience would be completely destroyed. And Massachusetts has a slow, grinding way of getting control of different areas. Having friendly settlers in the area was step one. Redefining the boundaries of your charter, step two. Having townspeople submit petitions to the General Court of Massachusetts, step three. And then once the ground is well watered, agents from Massachusetts showing up and appointing new leaders under a Massachusetts jurisdiction. And they could get away with this because of the chaos back in England proper. John Winthrop, supposed friend of Roger Williams, in 1642, writes that Providence and Rhode Island are under no government. This is part of step one, to deny that any government exists there in the first place. Here's a curious event from the same year, in September of 1642. There was a Providence offshoot called Pawtuxet, not Patuxet, which was the native name for Plymouth. There was a Massachusetts sympathizer there who basically led the little offshoot called William Arnold. Arnold previously stole William's deed for Providence and cut out all references to Pawtuxet. Having done that, he now submitted to the Massachusetts General Court a request to be absorbed by the colony. Massachusetts then organizes the NEC, the New England Confederation, or the United Colonies of New England. Not uniting with Rhode Island and specifically excluding Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and Maine. It consisted of Massachusetts, Plymouth, the New Haven Colony, and the New Connecticut Colony. These four would become the Puritan colonies, and in their unity, would undermine and aggressively go after the lands of Rhode Island and Providence. The Mohegan leader Uncas comes back into the story now. Uncas had been pursued in a number of assassination attempts from a Narragansett sachem named Miantonomo, nephew to the great Canonicus himself. Uncas gets the better of him and manages to capture Miantonomo, and he brings him in front of the court of this United Colonies of New England to ask permission to kill Miantonomo. This was not an act of subservience to the United Colonies, but rather common procedure among Native American tribes in the Northeast to consult with their allies when considering killing a very important enemy who might trigger a war with their death. The court, in their own way, approves of the killing, as long as it happens away from them. And with that, Miantonomo, a person who signed off on many of the land deals that Roger played part in establishing Providence and the other plantations around him, he was at least a small part of validating the colony's existence. Uncas took him and split his head in half with a tomahawk, and then he cut a piece of flesh from the dead man's shoulder and ate it, and proclaimed that it was the sweetest meat he ever had. Within the Narragansett country, the sachems that now favored Connecticut and Massachusetts and New Haven received more clout, as now it became apparent that these new United Colonies of New England were quite powerful. One of the last land sales that Miantonomo was party to was the location of Shawomet to a group of people known as the Gortonists, organized under Samuel Gorton, a man pretty much kicked out of every other place in New England, including Providence. But Williams secured a nice spot for him nearby and organized an agreement with the Narragansett. With Miantonomo dead, the Massachusetts Bay Colony denied the validity of the sale and actually found the sachems who were more inclined to them to deny that the sale was legitimate. A man by the name of William Coddington, who would lead the settlement of Newport on the south end of Rhode Island, then submits a petition to the Massachusetts government for the absorption of Rhode Island. So native allies are being killed, Shawomet is being invaded by an army bent on removing the Gortonists, and Hutchinson flees to New Netherland. Powtuxet, the offshoot of Providence, is being infected within, and the deed of Providence altered to give Massachusetts an in to absorbing it. Roger Williams' safe haven is quickly crumbling around him. But now where he had previously ran away to New England, Plymouth, Massachusetts, the outskirts of Plymouth, and then removed to his settlement of Providence, he would make his stand. Williams would now go to England and try to receive some sort of charter from the parliamentary government, for whom Massachusetts and the other Puritan colonies had already submitted themselves. In England, he becomes quick friends with the Earl of Warwick, with Sir Henry Vane, with Oliver Cromwell. He publishes a book on the native languages of southern New England, establishing himself as an authority on all things New England. He also publishes a second book called The Bloody Tenant, his most comprehensive and radical publication, where he argues for freedom of conscience, separation of church and state, tolerance of other religions, and argues that government derives from the governed, not God. This gets him in a little trouble, and there are public burnings of his book. But his strong friendships earns him a charter. Sir Henry Vane, the former governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, being the most vocal proponent for Roger Williams. And so in 1644, Roger Williams arrives at the port of Boston, the center of the colony that he is banished from, with explicit permission from the English government to land there, overriding their banishment of him. And in his hand was a charter. But the charter was not for Rhode Island. It's not even for Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Roger Williams' 1644 charter was for specifically Providence Plantations in the Narragansett Bay. Yes, the road to Rhode Island is not over yet, and there are many challenges ahead, including William Coddington's own charter and a less than legitimate charter that the Massachusetts Bay Colony will use to try to absorb Providence.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.